God won't let you fall apart, hold on to His promises. Have you ever felt like you're holding on by a thread? Like the weight of life is pressing down on you, and no matter how hard you try, you're slipping. You fight to stay strong, to keep pushing forward, but deep inside, the exhaustion is real. The burdens are heavy. The battles seem endless. I know that feeling. Maybe right now, you're carrying a pain that no one else can see. Maybe you're smiling on the outside, pretending everything is fine, but inside, you're breaking. You've prayed, but the answers seem far away. You've tried, but the struggle hasn't eased. And just when you think things might get better, another wave of hardship crashes over you. But listen to me, God won't let you fall apart. He sees every tear, hears every silent prayer, and knows every ache in your heart. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. The same God who parted the seas, healed the broken, and raised the dead is the same God who is holding you right now. The enemy wants you to believe that this is the end, but God is saying, keep going. I am with you. He is your strength when you feel weak, your peace in the storm, and your hope when everything seems lost. So don't give up. Hold on to Him. Because even when life feels like it's unraveling, His hands are holding you together. Your story isn't over, God is still writing it. The darkest moments of Liam, a powerful testimony of faith and redemption. Life hits hard. A job loss. A betrayal. A dream shattered. Sometimes, it feels like God is silent. I know that silence well. I lived it. There was a time in my life when everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, seemed to collapse overnight. I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, a stable job, a loving family, a future that seemed secure. But then, one by one, the pillars of my life began to crumble. It started with my job. After years of dedication, I was unexpectedly let go. No warning. No explanation. Just a cold conversation in a sterile office, followed by a walk to my car with a box of my belongings. I told myself it was just a setback. That I'd find another job. That things would work out. But life had more storms in store for me. A few weeks later, I discovered that a close friend, someone I had trusted with my deepest secrets, had betrayed me. Lies, deception, and the kind of hurt that cuts deep. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, unable to breathe. Then, as if the universe wasn't done breaking me, a dream I had worked on for years fell apart. I had poured everything into it, time, money, heart, but in the end, it slipped through my fingers like sand. And in the middle of it all, God was silent. I remember one night, sitting alone in my car, rain tapping against the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing with questions, doubts, and fear. God, where are you? I whispered. No answer. Tears blurred my vision as I slammed my fists against the dashboard. Are you even listening? Do you even care? The silence was deafening. I had always been the one encouraging others, telling them to have faith, to trust in God's plan. But in that moment, I wasn't sure if I even believed it myself. I felt abandoned. Forgotten. Unseen. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I stopped praying. Stopped reading my Bible. Stopped believing that God was working in my life. I woke up every morning with an emptiness inside me that I couldn't shake. I felt like I was drowning, like no matter how hard I tried to stay afloat, the weight of my pain was dragging me deeper into the abyss. Friends checked in on me, but I pushed them away. I didn't want to hear their encouragement. I didn't want their prayers. I wanted answers, and since I wasn't getting any, I convinced myself that maybe faith had been a lie all along. One night, at my lowest point, I found myself driving aimlessly. I didn't know where I was going, and honestly, I didn't care. I ended up parked outside an old church. The lights were off. The doors were locked. But something about that place called to me. I sat there in the stillness, staring at the empty building, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to break. I wept. I wept for the job I lost. I wept for the betrayal. I wept for the dream that had died, and I wept because I felt so incredibly alone. God, if you're real, if you're still there, I need you to show me. The silence stretched on. No sudden miracles. No audible voice from heaven. Just the quiet hum of the night. I sighed, defeated, and was about to start my car when something caught my eye. A small light flickered on in the church window. I frowned. I was sure the place was empty. But as I watched, the light grew brighter, spilling through the stained glass windows, illuminating the cross at the top of the building. And then, in that moment, I felt it. Not an earthquake, not a booming voice, but a presence. A deep, overwhelming peace washed over me. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't a solution to all my problems. But it was something greater. It was a reminder. God wasn't absent. He was there. He had always been there. Even in the silence. Even in my darkest moments. That night changed everything. Did I wake up the next morning with all my problems solved? No. My job was still gone. The betrayal still stung. The dream I lost was still dead. But something inside me had shifted. I realized that faith isn't about always hearing God's voice or understanding His plan. Faith is trusting that He is working, even when we can't see it. I started praying again. Not because I suddenly had all the answers, but because I realized I never had to face my struggles alone. I picked up my Bible and read words that I had read 100 times before but never truly understood until that moment. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4 verses 8-9. God never promised an easy life. But He promised that we would never walk through the fire alone. Looking back, I now see what I couldn't see then. Losing that job. It led me to a new opportunity one never would have considered before, one that aligned even more with my purpose. The betrayal. It removed people from my life who weren't meant to be part of my future. The shattered dream. It made room for God's dream, one I never even imagined for myself. The silence. It wasn't God's absence. It was His preparation. Some of the greatest miracles happen in the middle of the darkest storms, not because the storm disappears instantly, but because God is with us in the storm. If you're in that place right now, if you feel like everything is falling apart, if God seems silent, let me remind you, His silence is not His absence. Hold on. Keep trusting. Because when you look back, you'll see that the very thing that tried to break you was the thing that God used to build you. And you will come out stronger. Because He never let you go. If Liam's testimony touched your heart, if you've ever felt like God was silent, drop a prayer request in the comments. I'd love to pray for you. And if you need a reminder that you're not alone, hit like and share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, God is still writing your story. God's promise in your pain, a story of hope and redemption. There are moments in life when the pain is so deep, the struggle so overwhelming, that we ask the same question that has echoed through history: God, where are you? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. You've prayed, but the answers don't come. You've held on, but things keep falling apart. You've trusted, but life still feels unbearably heavy. You're not alone in that feeling. Some of the greatest figures in the Bible felt it too. When Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, he probably thought, God, where are you? When David hid in caves, running for his life, he might have wondered, Lord, have you forgotten me? Even Jesus, on the cross, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? The silence of those moments is deafening. The pain feels unbearable. But here's what I want you to know, God was writing a greater story. Imagine being betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you. Joseph, a young man with dreams of greatness, never imagined that his own brothers would turn against him. One moment, he was his father's favorite son. The next, he was thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, and carried away to a foreign land. I wonder if, as he sat in that pit, he cried out to God, "Why is this happening to me? I thought you had a plan for my life." Maybe you've asked the same question. God, why did I lose my job? Why did they betray me? Why did my dream fall apart? What Joseph couldn't see in that moment was that God was still in control. The pit wasn't his final destination, it was just a stop on the journey to the palace. Running for his life, David's story. David knew what it was like to feel forgotten. He had been anointed as king, yet instead of wearing a crown, he was running for his life, hiding in caves, hunted by King Saul. Can you imagine what he must have felt? God, you promised I would be king. Why am I hiding in a cave instead? Maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you know God has called you to something greater, but right now, all you see are closed doors and unanswered prayers. But here's the truth, God wasn't just preparing the throne for David. He was preparing David for the throne. The waiting season wasn't wasted, it was building strength, character, and faith. And then, there's Jesus. Hanging on a cross, bleeding, broken, mocked by the very people he came to save. He had healed the sick, raised the dead, and preached about the love of God. Yet here he was, alone, suffering, abandoned. My God, why have you forsaken me? It was the cry of humanity. The cry of every broken heart that has ever wondered, God, where are you? But what seemed like the darkest moment in history was actually the greatest victory of all time. Because 3 days later, Jesus rose. He conquered sin. He conquered death. He made a way for you and me to have eternal hope. When the pain feels unbearable. Maybe you're in the pit right now, just like Joseph. Maybe you're hiding in the cave, just like David. Maybe you feel abandoned, just like Jesus did on the cross. And maybe it feels impossible to believe that God is still working in your story. But let me remind you, God is never late. The pit didn't destroy Joseph, it positioned him for the palace. The cave didn't break David, it built him into a king. The cross didn't defeat Jesus, it was the very thing that led to his resurrection. Your pain is not the end of your story. God's promise in the pain. Here's what I've learned. God's greatest work often happens in our greatest pain. When life feels uncertain, God is still sovereign. When you feel abandoned, He is closer than ever. When your plans fall apart, His plan is still intact. That's why Romans 8 verse 28 says, "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him." Not in some things. Not just in the good things. But in all things. Your story isn't over. If you're still breathing, God is still writing your story. Joseph's betrayal led to a position that saved a nation. David's years of hiding led to him becoming a mighty king. Jesus' suffering led to the salvation of the world. And your pain? It's not wasted. It's not meaningless. It's part of something greater than you can see right now. One day, you'll look back and realize that the very thing that tried to break you was what God used to build you. So hold on. Trust Him. Because your story isn't over yet. Keep holding on. If this message spoke to your heart, if you've ever felt like God was silent in your pain, I want to encourage you today, He is with you. Even now. Drop an amen in the comments if you're holding on to His promise today. Share this with someone who needs this reminder. And remember, God is still working in your story. Like, share and subscribe to Spiritual Journals for more faith-filled encouragement. You are not alone. And your story is far from over. How you can hold on, finding strength in God's promises. When life feels unbearable. Have you ever felt like you were one step away from breaking? Like the weight of everything you're carrying is just too much. Maybe you're in a season where life feels like it's unraveling, bills piling up, relationships falling apart, dreams slipping through your fingers. Maybe you've been crying out to God, but all you hear is silence. I get it. I've been there too. You're tired. You're frustrated. You're wondering, God, how do I hold on when everything feels like it's falling apart? But here's what I want you to hear today: you don't have to hold on by your own strength. God is holding you. And when you feel like you can't go another step, I want to remind you of 3 powerful truths that will help you stand firm in the storm. Truth number 1, God holds you together. Life feels like it's unraveling. But God is still in control. Have you ever watched something slowly unravel? A thread coming loose from fabric, a sandcastle washing away in the tide? That's how life can feel sometimes. You try to hold everything together, your job, your family, your emotions, but no matter how hard you try, things keep slipping through your fingers. The stress builds, the fear creeps in, and the weight of it all feels like too much to carry. But here's the truth: you were never meant to hold everything together. That's God's job. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. Colossians 1 verse 17. Right now, you may feel like your world is unraveling, but I need you to hear this: God is still in control. Think about Joseph. One moment, he was the favored son, the next, he was thrown into a pit by his own brothers. His world was crashing down, his dreams shattered, his future uncertain. I wonder if he sat in that pit, staring up at the sky, and asked the same question we all ask in our darkest moments: God, where are you? Why is this happening? Joseph couldn't see the full picture. He didn't know that the pit was just the beginning of a greater plan. Even in the pit, God was still in control. Even in prison, God was still with him. Even in the waiting, God was working behind the scenes. And in the end, Joseph's story didn't end in the pit, it ended in the palace. What seemed like a tragedy was actually a setup for something greater. When your life feels like it's falling apart. Maybe today, you feel like Joseph in the pit. Maybe life has thrown you into a situation you never expected. Maybe the job you counted on is gone. Maybe someone you trusted betrayed you. Maybe a dream you worked so hard for has fallen apart. And now, you're sitting in the middle of the wreckage, wondering, where is God in all of this? Let me remind you, He is right here. God has not abandoned you. Even in your pain, He is still holding you together. You may feel like you're losing control, but God never has. The same God who brought Joseph from the pit to the palace is the same God who is working in your story right now. God is holding you, even now. I know it's hard. I know it's painful. But your story isn't over. God is still writing it. If you feel like life is falling apart, hold on. Because one day, you'll look back and realize that the very thing you thought would break you was the thing God used to build you. So trust Him. Even in the waiting. Even in the uncertainty. Even in the storm. Because He is still holding you. And He always will. Truth number 2, you are never alone. The lies that fear tells you. Fear has a voice, and it whispers lies. You're all alone. No one cares. God has forgotten you. These lies creep in during the darkest moments, when you're overwhelmed, when you're hurting, when you're wondering if anyone even sees the pain you're carrying. But here's the truth: you are never alone. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Isaiah 41 verse 10. God's presence isn't just a distant promise, it's a present reality. Right now, in this very moment, He is closer than the breath in your lungs, the heartbeat in your chest. Even if everyone else walks away, He never will. Think about David. One moment, he was celebrated as a hero, the giant slayer, the anointed future king of Israel. The next, he was running for his life, hiding in caves, hunted by the very king he had once served. I imagine there were nights when David sat alone in the darkness, listening to the echoes of the cave, asking, God, have you left me? Maybe you're asking the same thing. God, do you even see me? Why do I feel so alone? Why does it seem like you're silent? But here's what I love about David's story: God never abandoned him. Not in the wilderness. Not in the caves. Not in his lowest, loneliest moments. Even when David couldn't see him, God was there, guiding him, protecting him, preparing him for the throne. And if God didn't abandon David, he won't abandon you either. When you feel like no one understands. Maybe right now, you feel unseen. Maybe you feel like no one understands what you're going through. But God does. He sees every tear. He hears every silent prayer. He knows every ache in your heart. Loneliness doesn't mean God has left you. Silence doesn't mean He's absent. Pain doesn't mean He has abandoned you. Even if the world turns its back on you, God never will. Hold on, you are not alone. So if you're in that lonely place today, if you feel like no one sees you, if you're wondering whether God has forgotten you, hold on. Because He is right there, closer than you can imagine. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34 verse 18. You don't have to do this alone. God is with you. Always. And if you're thinking, I want to believe this, but I still feel weak, I hear you. And that brings us to the third and final truth, the truth that changes everything. Truth number 3, His grace is enough. The world says, be strong, but God says something greater. We live in a world that tells us we have to be strong. Push through. Don't let them see you struggle. Figure it out on your own. We are told that weakness is failure, that showing vulnerability is a sign of defeat. But here's the truth that changes everything: God never asked you to be strong enough. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9. God's power doesn't require your strength, it requires your surrender. He is not looking for those who can handle everything on their own. He is looking for those who will trust Him when they can't. Paul, one of the greatest figures in the Bible, knew this truth deeply. He endured beatings, imprisonment, shipwrecks, and persecution. His life was marked by hardship, trials, and moments where most people would have given up. Yet, in his weakest moments, when he cried out to God for relief, God didn't remove the struggle. Instead, He gave Paul something even greater: my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God didn't tell Paul to push through on his own. He didn't say, figure it out. He said, my grace is enough. And that same grace is enough for you. Maybe today, you feel like you can't keep going. You're exhausted from the battle. You've prayed, but the breakthrough hasn't come. You've fought, but you still feel weak. And you wonder, God, why is this so hard? Let me remind you. Weakness is not a failure, it's an invitation. An invitation to lean on His strength, not your own. So if you feel weak today, if you feel like you can't take another step, that's okay. You weren't meant to carry this alone. God's strength is not just available, it is more than enough to carry you. His grace will sustain you, even when life feels impossible. So let go of the pressure to be strong enough. Rest in the truth that His power is made perfect in your weakness. Because His grace is enough. Always. I know the battle is tough. But hear me, you are tougher. Not because of your strength, but because of His. If you're holding on by a thread, remember, God is holding on to you. If you feel alone, remember, He is with you. If you feel too weak to go on, remember, His grace is enough. So, how do you hold on when life feels like it's falling apart? You let God hold you together. You remember that you are never alone. You rely on His grace, not your own strength. The enemy wants you to believe this is the end of your story. But God is saying, keep going. I am with you. My friend, if you are watching this, it's not by accident. This moment, this message, God planned it for you. He sees your struggle. He knows the weight you're carrying. And He's saying to you right now, hold on. I've got you. I know it's hard. I know some days feel impossible. But you are not forgotten. You are not alone. The same God who held Joseph in the pit, David in the cave, and Jesus through the cross is the same God who is holding you now. Your pain is not the end of your story, God is still writing it. So don't give up. Don't let the lies of the enemy convince you that this is where your journey ends. Your breakthrough is coming. Your victory is ahead. And until then, God is walking with you every step of the way. If this message touched your heart, type Amen in the comments as a declaration of faith. If you need prayer, drop your request below, I'd love to pray for you. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it with them today. Subscribe to Spiritual Journals for more faith-filled encouragement. Hit the bell so you never miss a message of hope. And remember, God won't let you fall apart. You are loved. You are held. And your story is not over. See you in the next video.